everybody. My name is Dan Cabral, and this is the 52 must-see movies and why they matter. And this week is a special episode. It's the 25th anniversary of a beloved film, a film that I absolutely love to death. And I got a good buddy of mine who we have similar tastes in football. And I think we're both Notre Dame fans. And so we're both a fan of Rudy, the beloved football film starring Sean Astin. And so this is a special episode of the 52 must-see movies and why they matter. And that gentleman that I mentioned, his name is Andrew Cabral. Andrew, welcome back, and I appreciate you doing this special episode with me.
No problem, Dan. Glad to be here. I guess if you were going to get someone to talk about Rudy, you might as well get a fellow Notre Dame college football fan in order to give it its proper due, or probably its less objective view.
Yeah, less subjective. I mean, all right, I'm not going to get in. We'll get into this at the end. I'm not going to get into it right now, but we'll get into this at the end. But obviously, Rudy is based on Daniel Rudy Rudiger, portrayed in the film by Sean Astin. You may know him from a few different things, but pretty much everybody knows him from playing Samwise Gamgee from The Lord of the Rings. That's the big thing besides Rudy. School Ties, he was in that. And he also appeared in the last season of Stranger Things. So if you're a fan of Stranger Things, you might recognize Sean Astin. It has got a really interesting cast. Another big name person who's kind of turned into the realm of directing rather than acting, even though he does play a recurring role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe of the butler slash driver for Tony Stark in the Iron Man films and the Marvel films. And that's Jon Favreau. So he's in this. He plays a character by the name of Bebob. D-Bob is his name. Don't ask me what D-Bob stands for. They don't really get into what D-Bob stands for. His name is D-Bob. Also, Ned Beatty. Ned Beatty, you might remember him from Superman, a bunch of other things. He's been an actor for many, many, many years. And he plays Rudy's father in this film. And also, I'll tell you, a really good character actor. I'm assuming that he died because we don't see him anymore in anything. And that his name is Charles S. Dutton. And he plays a character by the name of Fortune. And this film was directed by a gentleman by the name of David Aspaugh. I'll be honest with you, Andrew. I can't recall any films that David Aspaugh directed besides this. You may be able to pop one up in your brain or may have looked this up. I didn't do my research like I probably should have.
Yeah, David Aspaugh directed, coincidentally, one of the other films that you will regard as all-time famous underdog stories, and that is Hoosiers. Wow. You could definitely see the connection here between that underdog story and this underdog story. Just to add on to what you were saying, Charles S. Dutton is still alive.
Wow.
I believe he's still acting. He is a great character actor. He's been in a lot of films, but he is great in this movie. I think he's just absolutely fantastic, and I think we'll get into that a little more later on. What is interesting about this movie is, as you said, Jon Favreau is in it as an actor, which is where he got his start initially, and then he transitioned into directing. But it's a very young Jon Favreau as well. This film came out in 1993. As we mentioned, it is the 25th anniversary, and it is a film that I think is one of the best sports movies of all time. It's certainly one of the best inspirational sports movies of all time.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter if you're a Notre Dame fan, if you're not a Notre Dame fan. It's such an underdog story that anybody can relate to it, especially if you're an athlete. but especially if you're a football fan or a Notre Dame fan like you and I happen to be. So we get little Daniel Rudy Rudiger, and he's playing around with his kids, and he's with these other guys, and of course they don't want him to be the quarterback or the receiver or anything. They just want him to be a blocker, whatever. They don't regard him as anything. He's never going to amount to anything, so on and so forth. And then we get him reciting the famous Newt Rockne speech. And if you know the speech, it's also recited in a famous movie called Newt Rockne All American, starring Ronald Reagan. And that is another famous Notre Dame story in the annals of history, the story of the Gipper. And of course, anybody growing up as a Notre Dame fan is going to know that famous speech, And so we see him as a little boy, and he really is a huge Notre Dame fan.
Yeah, right away we see him getting picked on for being smaller than all the other boys. His brother doesn't let him play anything but stationary snapper, where he just, hands the ball to the kid playing quarterback and then just stands there. He doesn't do anything. And because he's too small, and they treat him as if he's less than they are. And that's a theme that's throughout the entire movie. But then we transition after he's a kid into when he's in high school, and he's playing for his local high school football team. And he's a senior, and his career in football is pretty much over at that point, because going from high school football into college football is a completely different territory. It's something that he's not suited for, considering his size. From what we understand, he wasn't recruited by any colleges to go play or anything like that. We also learned that his grades aren't very good as well, and he really wants to attend the Notre Dame, and he can't get in as a player, and he really can't get in as a student. There's even the one sequence where all the students that want to apply to Notre Dame are going to go on a field trip there to basically see the school. And the teacher who is taking them on this trip doesn't even let him go on it, which I thought was a really just awful thing to do to any student. Really to stifle someone's dreams and hopes and not even let them have a chance to do it, I think it's a pretty terrible and disheartening thing. And you see that theme coming up a lot, where people around him are really crushing his dream constantly. You get the scene at his family's house, where earlier on when he's a kid, you learn that his brother wants to go to college as well, but the dad convinces him to go work at the local mill, because that's kind of what people do in this town. You don't really do anything past high school. You don't really go to college. You just go and work at the local mill. It seems like a very blue-collar-esque town, a small town. And you also learn that his other brother's going to go work there as well, but he had other aspirations as well. And you see a very antagonistic viewpoint from him throughout the whole movie. And we also see an antagonistic viewpoint from the father. The father doesn't want Rudy to go off to college. He doesn't think he can do it. He just thinks that he's going to go work at the mill along with his brothers, along with his father as well. And Dan, I don't know if you want to add anything in that kind of high school-esque sequence, because we do get a flash forward to 4 years later after that sequence kind of ends.
Yeah, well, what I like about him, you show his toughness. They do what's called the Alabama drill. I don't know if you've ever been involved. I coached some high school football, and the Alabama drill is you go up against the guy, and you have to tackle him and take him to the ground. One guy's the runner and one guy's the tackler, the defender, and you have to tackle him, and he has to get over this line. And it shows how tough he really is, and that's going to come back later in the film, because he does something later in the film very similar to what he does in that Alabama drill in high school. And then also, like you said, the steel factory, he's late to work. There's no late days here. His father makes sure he points it out to him. There's no late days here, Rudy. And he's basically, giving him a hard time while he's walking by, and you can tell this isn't the life for Rudy. He's not really all kind of into this working life, but he understands he has to find a way to make some money. So what he ends up doing is working to make some money, and he's at this point he's 22 years old, and
Yeah.
he's go ahead.
I was gonna say there's a 4-year time jump between when his high school life ends, and then 4 years goes by. We see that he's working in this mill along with his father, who I believe is kind of like a foreman or something like that. The boss of the place, if you will. And his brothers are working there as well. And he hates it, of course. He has bigger dreams than working at a mill for the rest of his life.
And he's got a buddy who, a high school buddy, they played football together and whatnot. He ends up buying him a jacket, a Notre Dame Letterman jacket. And I'll tell you what, this is the greatest gift Rudy has ever gotten in his entire life. This jacket really means a lot to him, and it keeps inspiring him to someday maybe he might play for Notre Dame. And so he eventually gets up the courage to tell his father that, and his girlfriend at the time, what's her name, Lily? Oh God, I don't have her down in my
I'll look
notes.
it up, Dan.
Lily Taylor.
Oh, it's Lily. Yeah, it's Lily Taylor.
Yeah, Lily Taylor's the girlfriend. She takes him to a house. They're gonna go. She wants to get married, and they want start a family and all this stuff. And he's like, no, this isn't the life for me. And he eventually tells his dad, Dad, I'm going to South Bend. I'm going to South Bend. And he saved enough money to where he just basically quits his job, and he tells his girlfriend and his father, I'm leaving. I'm going to South Bend.
Yeah, what happens is, like Dan said, like he's had this, you get this idea of the small town culture where the people you meet when you're a kid are the people you're going to know your whole life. He's got a best friend. There's this little girl this girl that he grew up with. They're going to end up getting married and having kids. And you get the sense that in this small town, that's what happens to pretty much everybody. There's no real expansion outward to larger cities or to the coasts or anything like that. And Rudy doesn't want that, like we've said. But what ends up happening is that his best friend ends up dying at the mill in an accident. He ends up basically, there was some type of overheating, and Rudy is trying to supply him with water for the hose to cool things down, and there's no water pressure, and it's a very suspenseful scene, and he's trying to tell his friend get out of there, there's no water pressure and stuff like that, and his friend ends up dying. And this is a kind of epiphany or wake-up call for Rudy, where he's like, I've got to go, I've got to fulfill my dreams. My friend was really the only person who ever took me seriously about fulfilling those dreams of going to Notre Dame, playing football at Notre Dame. Like Dan said, he bought him the Letterman's jacket, and he goes really right from the funeral to the bus station to leave town. He pretty much doesn't tell anybody until his dad shows up at the bus station and tells him that he's leaving. His dad initially is kind of like, oh, you can have a couple of weeks off from work or whatever to recover. And we know that he's leaving town. He's not going to be back for a while. And he does leave town, gets on the bus, goes to South Bend, Indiana, goes to Notre Dame. And when he gets there, it's very late at night. And he talks to the security guard at the gate. And he's like, I want to talk to somebody about going to school here, and the guy's like, the place is not going to be open for hours. There's no one really here. But you can talk to a priest. There's probably a priest available to talk to. So he goes and he visits the priest, and the priest initially thinks that he wants to apply for the priesthood and doesn't pick up on the fact that he wants to go to school there. And it's a very kind of comedic exchange between the two. And what ends up happening is that he talks to this priest, and and he tells this priest that my grades aren't up to snuff to get into the university. And the priest says, well, I can arrange it so you can go to the local community college of Holy Cross, and if your grades are good, you can, apply again. You can keep applying until you get in, of course.
No, you're absolutely right. That guy's like, hey, do you want to join the the priesthood? And he's like, no, I want to go to Notre Dame. And so that's kind of funny. But that's the biggest break he's gotten in his entire life, really, to this point, Andrew, is to get a chance to go to Holy Cross, go to the community college, go there for 2 years. If he gets his grades, then he can go to Notre Dame. And that is one of the best opportunities he's got. But this is when we realize that high school curriculum and high school academics aren't necessarily the same as the college academics. He has a hard time, and he meets a guy by the name of D-Bob, played by Jon Favreau. And Jon Favreau sees him talking to a girl in the hallway, and he thinks, oh, this guy's a ladies' man. And they go talk to him. And he's like, I'll help you out. I can get you an A in that class. And he's like, I can get you an A in that class, and you're going to help me get a girlfriend. You're going to help me talk to the ladies, because I have a problem talking to the ladies.
Well, it's interesting. He doesn't admit it. He actually tries to play himself up as the ladies' man. Like because the background with the D-Bob character is that he goes to Notre Dame already. He's a TA, teacher's assistant at the community college, and he can help tutor Rudy, to help with his grades. But he needs Rudy to help him talk to girls. But the way he approaches him, he says, like, oh yeah, I've already kind of, gone through all of the girls at Notre Dame. I want to, about the girls here, I want some assistance with, if you will. And that's when we get kind of this montage of Rudy going around and talking to all of these women for D-Bob. And then there's one instance where they're in, I believe, the cafeteria, and they're eating, and this one girl comes up to him and starts talking to D-Bob directly, and D-Bob's just frozen. He just doesn't say anything, so Rudy starts talking for him, and that's when we realize that, yeah, D-Bob can't socialize with women at all. Like, he could talk a lot, though. He could socialize with Rudy. I mean, he talks so much to him, but when it comes to women, can't do it at all.
Yeah, he can't. So they become fast friends, needless to say, and he just happens to be walking around, and he sees the stadium, and he sees the gate. Nowadays, this couldn't happen. You just can't walk into something and Notre Dame Stadium and just walk into the field and say, oh, okay, I'm going to walk around. But this is a movie, so we're going to leave a little bit to be imagined here. So he walks into the stadium, and he's like looking around, and his eyes are like bulging out of his head. He's so excited. He's like, he can't believe that he's standing in Notre Dame Stadium. And across the way, a gentleman, which we already introduced as Charles S. Dutton. His name is Fortune. He said, hey, you can't be in here, kid. And he goes, I'm going to be playing on this field someday. Yeah, I know, but you got to get out of here now. And one thing leads to another. He ends up coming back and talking to Fortune because, even though he's going to school, his little money that he saved up ain't going to last him that long. He really doesn't have a place to stay. So he needs a job, and he convinces Fortune to give him a job on the grounds crew at Notre Dame Stadium. And
yeah, he does. He convinces him. He actually says that he'll work there for free. He's such a big fan that he doesn't care about making money or anything like that. That he'll just work there for free. And then Fortune's like, I can pay you minimum wage, basically doing him a favor, saying, you can't work for me for free. I don't think legally he could possibly do that. So I think they have to pay him minimum wage.
Yeah,
which he does. So at this point he's going to school at Holy Cross. trying to get the grades to get into Notre Dame. He's working at Notre Dame as part of the grounds crew to, just to stay affiliated with Notre Dame because he's such a big fan.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also helps him kind of have a drive, what he's trying to go for. Working there and going to Holy Cross are the two things that kind of coincide with him really wanting to get his dreams. And so he's also working towards helping D-Bob. So he meets some girls and stuff, and they go to a dance. And go ahead.
Yeah, there's also one scene where he goes to the coach's office at Notre Dame. It doesn't have an appointment, doesn't have anything. And this was kind of right when this was actually, he's not at the school. He, like, right after he meets with the priest and he's setting up at Holy Cross, he goes to talk to the coach, tell him that I'm going to, I want to be on this team someday, whatever. And I don't think the coach takes him, serious call security or anything like that, but he doesn't really take him seriously. And the coach at the time is, the famous Notre Dame coach in the 1970s. Dan, I'm probably going to...
Era Parsegian.
Parsegian, right. And he decides that he's going to confront him and just tell him that he wants there. And then the film kind of plays out in a kind of not stereotypical, I don't want to say that, but it plays out in a way where, he keeps battling. He keeps struggling. Like, he keeps going to class. He keeps applying. There's kind of a montage, this kind of sequence where he keeps applying and he keeps getting denied. After the first semester, he can apply. He gets denied. After the second semester, he gets denied, and he can apply again. And I think he applies, I want to say, about 3 times. Is it 6? I want to say he applies his entire freshman and sophomore year. Later on in the movie, we learn is that Notre Dame doesn't take senior transfers, so he has to get in as a junior. He has to get into the university as a junior. Not so much, on the football aspect of it, but just to be there academically. He needs to apply. He needs to get in there on his junior year, and during that time, he goes through kind of emotional ups and downs. Gets discouraged about not being able to get in, but he keeps applying. There's one sequence where he goes back home, I believe for Christmas or some type of holiday, and he tries to reconnect with his family, but he's kind of changed as a person. At least that's what I got. I got this instance that he's almost too big for this town, too big for this family, and he doesn't quite fit in anymore. It doesn't help that he goes back to town and his brother still, hates on his dream. His father the same way. His old girlfriend is now a couple with his older brother. He doesn't. That's not his world anymore.
No, you're right about that. And one of the things he does to be around Notre Dame is he joins the boosters. He lies and said he's a student of the boosters, and he lies. And one of the things he can do to join the boost, all the different clubs that are available, is join the boosters. And one of the things he can do is paint the helmets. So this is like a big deal to him, going into the Notre Dame locker room, painting the helmets and stuff like that. And so he once again gets up there, and he's reciting that famous Newt Rockney speech again. He does it a couple times in the movie. I think he does it for Fortune one time. I think they're doing some work in the locker room, and he does it for him, or he does it for the girl. I think he kind of likes the booster girl. But then he slips up. He's at a bar. He's at a bar, and they're drinking, and they're having a good time. And he slips up, and he makes a mistake, and he says, I'm going to Holy Cross, but I'm going to be going to Notre Dame soon. And blah, blah, blah. She goes, "You're not a student at Notre Dame? Well, you can't help in the boosters anymore." And he realized, no, I'm going to go to Notre Dame. Duh. And she's like, and she walks away. So he kind of screwed up because when he was drinking, he made a mistake. People, you tend to say things you don't mean when you're drinking. That happens to all of us, I'm sure.
That is very true. And it's very interesting because the way in which he meets that girl is that D-Bob wants him to talk to her for him, and that's when he ends up signing up, to do the painting of the helmets and stuff like that. The scene you mentioned when he recites the new Rocky speech is when he's working the grounds crew and he gets to go in there and he's just starting to recite all of the great Notre Dame football players that went there, and that that could have been their locker, that could have been their locker, or whatever. He's almost having a religious experience of being in that place. And if you're a big sports fan, or if you're really a fan of anything, like really diehard, when you are standing in the place where something like that happens, where the team is from, you're standing in the stadium, you're just there, or when you're a fan of anything and you're at the source, there's a specific feeling that you can't quite describe. And Dan, I know that you've been to Notre Dame University and you've seen the field, you've seen the place, so it's a very unique experience. I think you can understand as well.
It's I'll tell you, when I went there, it's one of the most beautiful places I had ever been in my entire life. Not literally, when I went there, Notre Dame played Michigan, and ironically enough, this week they're playing Michigan. This video is going to go up in about 3 weeks, but so it's going to go up in a couple of weeks late, after the Rudy anniversary and Notre Dame's playing Michigan. But I mean, Touchdown Jesus was bigger than life. I mean, it's just gigantic mural, like art on the side of a building, and you see it when he goes into Notre Dame Stadium. You see behind him is Touchdown Jesus. They got a great angle when he was walking in the Notre Dame Stadium. You see behind him Touchdown Jesus. But something I wanted to touch on too is because of his financial problems and not having a lot of money, he ends up seeing that because Fortune takes him into his office one day and he notices there's a cot in there, and he says, "Hey, I have a home," and blah blah blah. And so what he does is he unlocks the window of the office, and he goes and he climbs up and he sleeps in the office. And then one day, all of a sudden, he sees a blanket and a key on the cot, and this makes him realize that Fortune helped him. He realizes he needs a place to sleep, and right. He helps him by leaving the key and the blanket there. But he also, when he goes, says, "Hey man, thanks for leaving the keys. I don't know what you're talking about." He can't have him sleeping in the office. So basically, he's going to deny that he's sleeping in there, even though he helped him by giving him the key and stop going through the window and going through the door. And he's got a blanket.
Basically, he tries to give him the key back after he eventually does get into Notre Dame, because I think we can assume that he's going to be staying in the dormitories there. At least that's the assumption I got. That now he has a place to live, temporarily until he graduates, of course. But and when he finally gets into Notre Dame, he right away wants to get on the football team, and the only way he can get on the football team is being a walk-on. And to be a walk-on is very tough in any college football team, let alone Notre Dame. But Coach Parsegian apparently was known for welcoming people to be walk-ons. And that's kind of one of the things that really inspired him, is that, Coach Parsegian will take my bid to be a walk-on seriously. And he tries. He shows up, and what we learn is that when you're a walk-on, they basically just beat you up. You're just there as basically a punching bag for the guys who are really going to play on Saturday. And he tries and tries and tries, and he's just like Dan said earlier, he's tough as nails. He just keeps going and never stops, and he has all heart and all guts. He doesn't have the talent, he doesn't have the size, but he's got the heart and the will to do it.
Well, when he went and saw Eric Parsegian that one time, Eric Parsegian said to him, he said, "If you get your grades and you get into Notre Dame, I will promise you that you can be a walk-on for Notre Dame. He promised him, and that he also made him a promise that he would dress for one game.
Yeah.
One game.
You mentioned that later on, basically, after, we'll skip ahead a little bit. Rudy does make the team, despite one of the assistant coaches not really wanting him. But there's one assistant coach that really sticks his neck out for him, and he does end up making the team as a walk-on, and he ends up being part of the practice squad or scout team. Basically, for those of you who are not football fans, the scout team is essentially what the first team practices on. Those are the guys that that the scout team runs the plays of the opponents in order for the real team to get a sense of what the opponents like to play when it comes to schemes and strategy and all that kind of stuff. And he ends up getting on the team. He ends up making the cut, and he doesn't suit up for games or anything like that. And he's kind of okay with that initially, but towards the end of the season of his junior year, he decides that he's going to ask the coach, can I, my dad, it'd be a dream for my dad. It'll be a dream for me. They don't believe that I am an actual player. I tell them I'm on the team. I tell them I go to practice every day, but they don't believe me. And the only way they will believe me is if I go out that tunnel and suit up for the team and play. And so the coach says, okay, next season we'll get you into one game. The problem is, around that same time, Coach Parsegian left the team, stepped down as the head coach of Notre Dame, and now a whole new coach comes in. And is that coach going to honor that agreement? That's the big question that Rudy, I think, asks himself.
The new coach is Dan Devine, but we're kind of getting a little ahead of ourselves here. I wanted to talk about how when he does get accepted, he goes home. He goes back to the town he lives in is Joliet, Illinois. Joliet, Illinois, if you know anything about Chicago and that part of the country, is a working town. It is a tough working town. There's no messing around in Joliet, Illinois. There's companies like CAT, otherwise known as Caterpillar, and big companies, big factories, big giant manufacturing companies that are in Joliet, Illinois. And so there's no messing around if you're from Joliet, Illinois. And when he finally gets into Notre Dame, he goes to show his father. And of course, his father's like, he can't believe it. I mean, he's so happy for his son. He's yelling. He yelled over the loudspeaker of the factory. He says, "My son's going to Notre Dame." Ned Beatty's yelling, and that's the happiest moment of his life, because he felt like everything he'd done for his kids and everything he's done in his life, that for one of his sons to be able to go to Notre Dame and play football for Notre Dame, that's like a dream come true for a father like it, even though they're so discouraging all the way up to this point. And if it wasn't for the toughness of the father and the toughness of Rudy, none of this would have ever happened. He really had to have an intestinal fortitude to get to this point in his life. And when you're talking about the practices, yeah, he takes that Alabama drill, and what does he do? He gets in there and he gets knocked down over and over and over again. And the coach, he goes, if you do this every day, you're going to make this team. And that one coach, because the offensive coach is like, nah, I don't want him on my team. But the defensive coach is like, yeah, that's the kind of toughness. And then Coach Parsegian, he goes, one of these guys, they start getting in a fight with him one day in practice. And he goes, if all you guys had the heart of Rudiger, we'd never lose. If I could put his heart in all you guys, we'd never lose. He's got 100 times the heart of you guys. I'd love 100 more of him. So that was kind of a big deal for Ara Parsegian to say that about Rudy Rudiger. You know what I mean?
And if you notice, the guy who I think gets upset is the actor Vince Vaughn, who's also in the movie. Very, very small role, but that's him as a very young actor. I think he's playing like the running back or something. It's very, very interesting how many actors are in this movie that you will then go on to see become the bigger names.
Yeah, you're right about that. But and then a couple things with Fortune I wanted to bring up too is that he's talking when he's kind of, when they're working together, they're kind of having conversations, and one of the conversations is, I'm gonna play on this field one day, and he's like, yeah, I saw many games, such and such, but then that comes back later, and he goes, I'm gonna be playing a game, and I want you to come to watch my game. And he goes, I never go in and watch a game on the field. He says, what do you mean? I thought you said you were at many games. He says, I was at many games. I played, but I never played. And he goes, if you play a game, I will be here watching you play. And so that's the relationship that Fortune and Rudy really developed. Same thing with Ara Parseghian. He really developed a relationship with Ara Parseghian that coaches can't really develop those kinds of relationships with players, but you could see how much he really cared about Rudy, even in the small scenes that he was in. He wasn't in a lot of big scenes, but the relationship between Fortune and Rudy really develops throughout the film, and you really care about this friendship that they have developed.
You do. It's a very mentor-mentee relationship where they have, where Charles S. Dutton's character of Fortune kind of gives him a lot of life advice. There's a scene earlier on before he gets into Notre Dame where he is very discouraged and he's very upset that he's failing at getting into Notre Dame. And the Fortune character is like, yeah, man, you're getting a great education. You're trying. You're doing your best. And there's even the moment later on in the movie. I mean, I am skipping ahead quite a bit, more towards the end where Rudy doesn't think that he's going to ever get to play. There's a sequence of montage later in the film where he keeps checking his name every single week to see if he's on the list to suit up. And he's not. And he's not. And he's not. He gets all the way to the last game of the season, and his name is still not on the list. So he's like, I'm not even going to go to my last practice. It's pointless. There's no reason why I should. So he goes over to the stadium, and the Charles S. Dutton character says, hey, shouldn't you be at practice right now? And he goes, I quit. And he's like, really? I didn't think you'd ever quit. And he's just down on himself. And the Charles S. Dutton character gives him one of the best motivational speeches in any movie you're probably ever going to see. I've watched a lot of, motivational speech montages on YouTube from movies, and that one keeps coming up over and over again. He's telling him that you have no athleticism, you have no skill, you're 5 foot nothing, you're nothing, yet you're still on the Notre Dame football team. You're still here, and you're also going to graduate from one of the best, universities in the country, as well. And you're up there, and he also says, you're up there competing against the best college athletes in the country as well. It's almost one of those things where, like, be happy with the things you have accomplished, and don't, dwell on the things that you haven't accomplished. It's a very, optimism versus pessimism, glass half full versus glass half empty, that type of philosophy.
No, you're absolutely right. That's probably one of the best speeches in the whole movie. I mean, there's some really good speeches in this movie, but that you're 100-0, you're 5 foot nothing, and yet here you are, you're on the Notre Dame football team, and you've accomplished so much in your life. Why throw it away for the last game of the season? And Dan Devine, of course, isn't Ara Parseghian, so he has no allegiance to Rudy Rudiger. He don't know who the hell Rudy Rudiger is, And one of the best scenes in the whole movie, all the players, starting either running back or quarterback or whatever, not quarterback, but receiver. I think he's a receiver. Goes in there, says, here, puts his jersey on, Coach Dan Devine's desk. I want Rudy to play for me. And the coach is like, what are you talking about? You're our best receiver. You're a pro. Yeah. He goes, walks out. Next guy comes in. I want Rudy to play for me. And they do this. The whole team does it. And needless to say, of course, the one guy that would have been playing in his place was his friend. And his friend, his relative or father or somebody had played for Notre Dame. And he has this legacy. So if he didn't go to Notre Dame and he didn't try out for the football team and he didn't be on the practice team, he'd be letting his father down. But it's like a whole different kind of legacy.
Oh, it's so interesting, the yin yang dynamic between Rudy and then that player and that character you're mentioning. He's the complete opposite of Rudy. He doesn't even want to play football. He doesn't want to be on this team at all. But if he doesn't, his dad won't pay his tuition because his father went to Notre Dame and he's a legacy and all that kind of stuff. It's a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it really is. And so he's the guy who doesn't get to dress out. So Rudy can dress out for that final game. And of course, he calls his dad up and you see the dad and the brothers. He calls his brother up. No, I want you to come to the game. I want you to be there for the game. Tells his dad, I want my brother to be there for the game. And then he also, he gets Fortune. You see Fortune hanging around by the tunnel to make sure Rudy knows that he's at the game. And before all this happens, the girl with the boosters, he goes, hey, don't I know you? And her name is Mary. Her name is Mary.
Yeah, when they have that whole montage of him doing the drills with the team, just getting beat up every practice, he gets knocked down and he gets up and she's standing there watching the practice. He goes, oh, don't I know you from somewhere? And then it's a great montage. But what is interesting is that we're getting to the climax of the movie, but right before that, after he talks with the Charles S. Dutton character, something we missed that's kind of really important because it's very indicative of what happens at the very end of this movie is when he shows up to that final practice. He shows up late, of course, and the players start chanting. They start chanting that famous chant, Rudy, Rudy. And the coach, I've never seen a coach so not offhand, but like standoffish when it comes to, coaching a team. He's up in like some type of, crow's nest with a horn and everything. I'm like, shouldn't you be on the field like actually coaching? It's very interesting. That's just me. But he's like, what's going on down there? What are they chanting? I can't hear. And it's that famous chant Rudy, which will definitely it's going to show up at the end of this movie.
Yeah, that I forgot all about that. I watched the movie a week ago to plan for this, but yeah, that is a famous thing. And another thing is, once he gets on Notre Dame, very very similar. D-Bob ends up getting in the law school of Miami, and he's like Miami, and then he shows up with his girlfriend, which Rudy introduced him to. Her name is Elsa, and so he says, hey, if you play, I'm going to come back from Miami. And here, wouldn't you know it, D-Bob comes back in a limo with Elsa, and she's she's good looking. She's not the Elsa that he left her with before they had left. But so this sets the stage for what would be a football game versus Georgia Tech. And Georgia Tech is on again, off again rivalry with Notre Dame. They always play every few years. They don't play a lot. I mean, back to back. But now with the ACC, they might play every 2 or 3 years as well because Notre Dame's in this rivalry where they have to play 5 ACC games. So they'll probably play Georgia Tech every once in a while. And I've been to a couple bowl games where they played Georgia Tech. So they do play them very frequently, not all the time, but pretty frequently. So. And you get this game. It's a tough game. Notre Dame's pretty much winning the game, and they get to the point where, okay, put all the subs in. Dan Devine says, put all the subs in. And the coach says, do you want Rudiger in? No, not Rudiger. Don't put him in. And that's when one of the players starts to chant. One of the guys that really didn't like Rudy at first, in the Alabama drills, he kept on going against this guy, and he would just drill him into the ground. And then they saw each other out in the parking lot one day. Hey, man, why don't you just cool it down? You're making us look bad. He says, if I cool it, then you guys won't be ready on Saturdays. And that really resonated with those guys, because he's like, you know what? That makes sense. That's why the practice squad is there, to get them prepared for those Saturday games. And so they started the chant, like you said, Rudy, Rudy. The announcers like, we hear something. We don't know what they're saying. And, of course, Dan Devine's like, kneel it, tells the quarterback, there's only 17 seconds to go in the game. Kneel it. The game is over. And, of course, the guys are like in the huddle, and they're like, well, no, if we kneel it, then Rudy can't play. He can't play on offense. So they throw a touchdown to go up 23-3 over Georgia Tech. So they end up having to kick the ball. Georgia Tech has to Notre Dame has to kick the ball off to Georgia Tech. So he ends up saying, okay, all right, go out there on special teams. And, of course, wouldn't you know it, he's running around, what do I do? What do I do? Where do I go? And he goes down there, makes a tackle on special teams. They got the ball. There's 6-7 seconds to go in the game. And Rudy's lining up on the end of the line, and the 7 seconds go. And when you know, he sacks the quarterback, and that ends the movie. And it's really a great scene that he gets in the game at the end of the game, and he sacks the quarterback. It really doesn't mean anything except for the fact that he got in the game and he had a chance to sack the quarterback. And to put a bow on this, I will say this. You know this. I know this. This isn't exactly the way things went.
No,
A gentleman by the name of Joe Montana, who was actually the quarterback of Notre Dame at that time, came out and said, look, this movie's fantastic. It's a terrific movie. I'm glad he got this spotlight in this movie, but this isn't exactly the way things happened. No. He wouldn't get in. He wouldn't go into details on how they happened differently, but it has been known that this isn't exactly how things happen. But who cares? Nobody cares how things actually happen. They only care about what happened in the movie.
That is true. I mean, with anything that's a biopic based on true events, things are always changed. Things are always changed for narrative reasons, artistic licenses taken. That happens all the time. It's been happening since they've been making movies. That's just the way it is. There's certain details in the movie they leave out. There's certain things they change. For example, at the end of the movie that Dan just talked about, Rudy was actually in on 3 plays and not 2. He was in on the special teams play. He was in on the next play, which was an incomplete pass. And this is real life events. And then the third play is the one where he gets his sack. And that's the one that remember. They cut out the incomplete pass because incomplete passes are boring, I guess. They cut out a sequence in Rudy's life where after high school, he actually joined the Navy and was in the Navy for a couple of years before he came home and began working at the same place that his family was working at. You know what I mean? So there's little details like that. Are they things that, that were necessarily needed to be in the movie? Probably not. Was the things that he went through at Notre Dame needed to be 100% accurate for us to enjoy this movie? Not so much. Yet again, it's a narrative film. It's not a documentary. If it were a documentary, that's when I think 100% facts are necessary because it's supposed to be a factual thing, an informative thing. This film is, based on characters and story and plot and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple scripted things at the end of the movie. When the movie ends, Rudy gets carried off the field. And to this day, no other player in Notre Dame history has ever been carried off the field. Rudy Rudiger is the only one since it's 1975, 96. So that's a lot of years have gone by.
It's
Somewhere in
been
the
about
neighborhood.
40 years, you know?
40 something years, not one player has ever been carried off the field since Rudy Rudiger. And he did get his degree from Notre Dame, and he did get married to Mary, the girl from the Boosters. And he then turned out to have a life as a motivational speaker. He made thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars doing motivational speaker work, which inspired many, many other people to go do all kinds of different things in their lives. Andrew, I know this wasn't one of the nominated films that we nominated, or it wasn't in the book, the first season of the 52 Must-See Movies, and I decided to do this as a special anniversary episode because it's the 25th anniversary. But it's still a phenomenal film, and it really resonates today to me and you as football fans and as fans of great movies. But just tell me why, in your opinion, why would Rudy be an essential film for people to watch? Not just football, not just sports, not just a great film. I believe it's a great film, despite the fact.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very, by this point in film history, if we're looking at it with a modern lens, it's cliched, the happy ending, warm feelings, things like that. But you have to put it within the context of when it came out, and you also have to understand that it fits within a certain genre. It is a sports movie. Sports movies tend to be very inspirational. They tend to be have happy endings. And this film fits into that mold very well, and it's one of the better ones. You have a young actor in Sean Astin who was already known for this film. Not known for this film. He was already known in the film world because he was in The Goonies when he was a young boy. But this is a film that I think really helped to define his legacy as an actor as well. It's a film that not only for football fans, it's not only about the sport, it's about other existential journeys that the character Rudy has to go through, which can be transferred onto many of the viewers that are watching. If you have a dream you are aspiring to, if you have goals in life you want to achieve, this film is very much inspiration for those. And the film does deal with, like I said, a lot of different philosophies about life and things like that. And it very much still transfers to today. It very much holds up because it has a lot of those universal themes within it.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, there's a lot of, look, people where I come from a hardworking city and a town where you just everything just wasn't handed to you. You had to work hard and whatnot, and people worked in mills and worked in factories and worked in different types of, not like Joliet, Illinois, but it really resembled my life as a kid. I mean, my brother was this type of character. My brother was a great football player growing up in high school, and he would have ended up going to a Catholic little three Division III Catholic college and whatnot, and he screwed up and did something wrong, ended up in the Navy, and then now he's been in the Coast Guard for 25 years. So it really resonates with me because it reminds me of myself, my family, my brother, and so forth. So there's a lot of different things within the movie Rudy, despite the fact that I'm a huge Notre Dame fan, that I could really relate to. But yeah, and Sean Astin, School Ties was another movie he was in back then. That was a really good movie about a Jewish kid going to a private school, and it had some football aspects to it with Brendan Fraser and Sean Astin was in there, and Matt Damon was in there. So you start back then. That's when you saw that kind of new generation of young actors that became the people that we saw all the time. The Matt Damons, the Brendan Frasers, the Ben Afflecks, the Sean Astins, those types of people we got to see for another 20 years. And now we got a whole new generation of young actors that are taking over now, and those guys are kind of becoming the older actors. It's kind of funny that the guys that were in all those younger movies back then and now are going to be the guys that tend to be the father figures, and that sort of stuff nowadays. So it's kind of funny. But Andrew, where can you be found?
You can find me on Twitter at Cabzilla06, as well as my YouTube channel, Cabzilla Productions.
And you can find me at Dan Skipallen on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest, or at From the Fourth Row at WordPress.com. Or if you want to read anything that I write, sports articles or movie reviews, you can go to Cinesportstalk.com. That's CINESPORTSTALK.com. So for Andrew and myself, good night.